Story 1. It was a cold, clear night, just shy of Christmas, in a little town nestled among the mountains of West Virginia. The year was 1945, and the world was just beginning to breathe a sigh of relief after years of turmoil. In Fayetteville, a quiet, close-knit community, life was slowly resuming its gentle rhythm. And it was there, on that crisp, almost magical Christmas Eve, that a story began to unfold. A story that would echo through generations, a haunting melody of unanswered questions. I never knew the Sodder family personally, not in the way one knows a neighbor or a distant cousin. But their story, like a persistent whisper carried on the wind, found its way into the collective consciousness of our region. An enduring enigma that even now, decades later, feels as fresh and perplexing as the night it began. It's a tale I've heard recounted in hushed tones around crackling fireplaces, a narrative that settles in your mind, not with a jolt of terror, but with a quiet, persistent hum of wonder. George and Jenny Sodder were, by all accounts, a vibrant and industrious couple. George, an Italian immigrant who had made his fortune in the trucking business, was a man of strong opinions and an even stronger work ethic. Jenny, warm and maternal, was the anchor of their large and bustling household. Together, they had 10 children, a joyful cacophony that filled their two-story home on the outskirts of town. Christmas Eve, for the Sodders, was a cherished tradition, a night filled with laughter, the rustle of wrapping paper, and the sweet anticipation of morning. On that particular Christmas Eve, the youngest children, Martha, Jenny, Betty, and Louis, along with their older sister Mary, had asked to stay up late, perhaps a little longer than usual, playing with their new toys and enjoying the festive spirit. George and Jenny, with the usual parental mix of indulgence and weariness, agreed, allowing the older girls, Marion and Sylvia, to stay up too. The oldest son, John, 23, and another son, George Jr., 16, had already retired for the night. Maurice, 14, and Louis, 9, were sleeping in one bedroom, and Martha, 5, Jenny, 8, Betty, 7, and Mary, 10, were in another upstairs bedroom. Louis, 5, was also with the younger children. Around midnight, Jenny was stirred from her sleep by the distinct sound of a thud on the roof, followed by a peculiar rolling noise. It was a strange disturbance, out of place in the quiet night. She listened for a moment, then, hearing nothing more, drifted back to sleep. Not long after, a persistent smell of smoke permeated the air, thick and acrid. This time, a crackling sound accompanied it. Jenny awoke with a jolt. She quickly realized the house was on fire. Flames had already begun to lick at the edges of the living room, where the children had been playing. With frantic urgency, she woke George. Their first thought, naturally, was for their children. George rushed to the 2 downstairs bedrooms, successfully rousing Marion, Sylvia, and John. Together, they stumbled out into the cold night, the glow of the fire already painting the sky. But 5 children were still inside. 5 children in the upstairs rooms, sleeping, they hoped, through the growing inferno. George, in a desperate attempt to reach them, tried to re-enter the house, but the smoke and heat were overwhelming. He called out to them, his voice hoarse with terror, but there was no response, only the hungry roar of the flames. In a horrifying twist of fate, every attempt to save the children seemed to be thwarted. George tried to use a ladder he usually kept propped against the house, but it was inexplicably missing from its spot. He then attempted to start his 2 coal trucks, hoping to drive them close enough to use them as makeshift ladders, but neither would start, despite having worked perfectly the day before. The phone line to their house was dead, and when a neighbor finally managed to call the fire department from a nearby house, the volunteer crew, already delayed, arrived only after the Sodder home had been reduced to a smoldering ruin. By dawn, the fire had devoured everything. The Sodder house was a heap of ash and charred timber. The family, shivering and grief-stricken, huddled together, watching the final wisps of smoke curl into the gray morning sky. When the local fire chief, a man named F.J. Morris, finally sifted through the debris, he declared that the fire had been hot enough to cremate the bodies, explaining the complete absence of human remains. The official verdict was that the 5 children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, had perished in the blaze. But Jenny Sodder, a mother's intuition a powerful, unwavering force, could not accept this. As the days turned into weeks, her quiet certainty grew into an unshakable conviction. She meticulously examined the site of their home, sifting through the ashes with her bare hands, searching for any fragment, any bone, any proof. But there was nothing, not a single tooth, not a single bone fragment. It was as if the children had simply vanished into thin air. Her mind began to retrace the events of that night, and the inconsistencies, small at first, began to loom larger. The thud on the roof, the missing ladder, the trucks that wouldn't start, the dead phone line. Each detail seemed to suggest something more than a tragic accident. And then there was the fire itself. Jenny had observed that the fire seemed to have originated not inside the house, but on the roof, perhaps where the mysterious thud had occurred. She also noted that the fire, though fierce, had not produced the distinct, acrid smell of burning flesh, a smell she knew all too well from her husband's work in the funeral business. These nagging doubts were compounded by strange incidents leading up to that Christmas Eve. A few weeks prior, an insurance salesman had visited, threatening George that his house would be burned down and his children would be destroyed due to his anti-Mussolini sentiments. George, a vocal critic of the Italian dictator, had dismissed the threat, but it now loomed heavy in Jenny's thoughts. Another peculiar event. A man was seen sitting in a car watching the Soder children as they returned from school, and a few nights before the fire, a stranger was observed stealing the very ladder George would later desperately need. The Soders, fueled by Jenny's unwavering belief, refused to let the case rest. They erected a large billboard on Route 16, just outside Fayetteville, featuring photographs of their missing children and offering a reward for any information. The billboard became a local landmark, a silent testament to a family's enduring hope. They hired private investigators, pursued every lead, no matter how faint or far-fetched. One early lead involved a motel owner in Charleston, who claimed to have seen the Soder children about a week after the fire. She said they were accompanied by 2 adult women and 2 men, all of whom spoke Italian. She noted that the children were carrying luggage and seemed to be in a hurry. The Soders hired a detective to investigate, but by the time he arrived, the motel owner's story had changed, and she claimed she hadn't seen them. It was a dead end, like so many others. Over the years, various tips and sightings emerged, each sparking a flicker of hope before fading into disappointment. In 1951, the Soders heard a report that some of their children had been seen in a monastery in Florida. George traveled there, but the monastery refused to let him see the children, claiming they were orphans and had to be protected. Without concrete evidence, George had to return home empty-handed. Perhaps the most compelling and heartbreaking lead came in the mid-1960s. Jenny received a letter postmarked in Kentucky, containing a photograph of a young man who looked remarkably like her son Louis, who would have been in his late 20s by then. On the back of the photo, a cryptic message was written: Louis Soder, I love brother Frankie. Hello boys. A 90132 or 35. The photograph reignited their hope, though also bringing a fresh wave of agony. They hired a new private investigator who traveled to Kentucky, but he never returned, and no further information was ever obtained. The mystery deepened rather than clarified with time. Could a fire so complete leave no trace? Fire experts later weighed in, suggesting that even in the most intense house fires, some skeletal remains, especially teeth, almost always survive. The complete absence of evidence continued to baffle. Some theorized a mafia connection, given George's outspokenness and the insurance salesman's threat. Others wondered if the children had been abducted for ransom, or perhaps adopted into a new family, unaware of their past. George Soder passed away in 1969, his heart heavy with the unresolved mystery. But Jenny, tenacious and unwavering, continued the search until her own death in 1989. For over 4 decades, she kept the billboard updated, a beacon of parental love and an enduring question mark against the backdrop of the Appalachian Mountains. Even after Jenny's passing, the surviving Soder children, particularly Sylvia, who was the last to see her siblings alive, carried on the legacy. They spoke to anyone who would listen, hoping that one day, a new piece of information might emerge, a forgotten memory, a whispered confession, to finally bring closure to the unfinished melody of that Christmas Eve. Today, the Soder children's disappearance remains one of America's most intriguing unsolved mysteries. There are no definitive answers, no clear paths to the truth. Only theories, speculation, and the quiet, persistent echo of a family's search. It's a story that reminds us that sometimes the world doesn't offer neat endings, that some puzzles are meant to linger, whispered from generation to generation, inviting us to contemplate the vast, often inexplicable, expanse of the unknown. And as the nights draw in and the world outside grows quiet, it's a tale that gently settles into the quiet corners of the mind, leaving you with a sense of wonder at the mysteries that remain, forever just beyond our grasp. Story 2. My dear friend, Draw close and let the soft glow of the lamplight chase away the shadows. Tonight, I wish to share with you a story, not of fantastical beasts or daring knights, but of a quiet enigma that unfolded upon the vast, indifferent canvas of the sea. It's a tale that speaks to the profound mysteries that lie just beyond our grasp, a gentle reminder that some questions are perhaps not meant to be answered, but simply to be held, like a smooth, sea-worn stone. Imagine, if you will, the year 1872. The world was bustling, full of steam and ambition, yet the oceans remained the wild, untamed heart of our planet. Ships, with their sails billowing like great white wings, were the tireless shuttles between continents, carrying goods and dreams and the brave souls who piloted them. Among these vessels was a brigantine, a sturdy, elegant ship originally christened the Amazon. She was a Canadian-built vessel, strong of oak and pine, though some whispered of an initial streak of ill luck in her early days. But in the hands of a good captain, a ship, like a person, can always find its true bearing. And under the care of Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, she had found hers. Captain Briggs was a man of quiet integrity, a devout soul, and a seasoned mariner, respected by all who knew him. He was a man deeply rooted in family and faith, a captain who knew the sea not as an enemy, but as a formidable, beautiful force to be understood and respected. For this particular voyage, from New York to Genoa, Italy, he would not be sailing alone. With him were his beloved wife, Sarah Elizabeth Briggs, and their precious 2-year-old daughter, Sophia Matilda. Can you picture them? The small family, nestled in the captain's cabin, the gentle creak of the ship's timbers their lullaby, the distant murmur of the waves their constant companion. Beyond his family, Captain Briggs commanded a loyal and capable crew of 7 men, experienced sailors, each chosen for their skill and trustworthiness. They were an international assembly, hailing from Germany, Denmark, and America, a testament to the diverse spirit of the maritime world. They had signed on for a routine voyage, a cargo of 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol bound for Italy. A simple, straightforward journey, one might imagine, across the shimmering expanse of the Atlantic. On the 7th of November, 1872, the newly rechristened Mary Celeste, for her name had been changed after a period of repairs and a transfer of ownership, perhaps to shake off any lingering whispers of that early ill luck, weighed anchor in New York Harbor. The air would have been crisp, the sun glinting off the water, and the city's distant sounds fading as she slipped silently out to sea. For the first few weeks, the voyage seemed entirely uneventful. The logbook, carefully maintained by the ship's first mate, reflected the mundane rhythms of life at sea. Fair winds, calm seas, routine watches, the occasional squall. A quiet progression across the vast blue, day after day, under the watchful eyes of Captain Briggs and his crew. Now let us turn our gaze, not to the Mary Celeste herself, but to another vessel, some 400 miles to the east of the Azores. This was the Dei Grazia, a brigantine too, though somewhat smaller, also en route from New York to Genoa. On the afternoon of December 4th, 1872, the Dei Grazia's first mate, a man named Oliver DeVoe, spotted something peculiar on the horizon. Another ship, nothing unusual in itself, but there was something amiss. She seemed to be sailing erratically, her sails partially set but fluttering uselessly, her course aimless. And most strangely of all, there was no sign of a lookout, no flag flying, no response to their hails. A ghost ship, perhaps, adrift on the endless blue. Captain David Morehouse, a close friend of Captain Briggs, felt a prickle of unease. He watched the vessel through his spyglass, noting the peculiar silence. He recognized her. It was the Mary Celeste. A shiver, I imagine, must have run through him. Why was she behaving like this? After waiting for 2 hours, and receiving no response, Captain Morehouse knew he had to investigate. He dispatched a small boarding party, led by his first mate, DeVoe, along with 2 other brave sailors. Can you imagine the mix of apprehension and deep curiosity as that small boat rowed silently towards the larger, silent ship, the only sound the rhythmic dip of oars in the water? As they drew alongside, the silence was profound, broken only by the creak of the Mary Celeste's rigging and the slap of waves against her hull. No shouts of greeting, no sounds of life. A chilling stillness hung in the air. DeVoe and his men climbed aboard. The first thing they noticed was the utter lack of human presence. The ship was utterly deserted. The air felt heavy, as if holding its breath. DeVoe cautiously explored the ship, his footsteps echoing in the unnatural quiet. What they found only deepened the mystery. The ship was in remarkably good condition. seaworthy in every respect, not a single sign of storm damage or struggle. The last entry in the logbook was dated November 25th, 10 days prior, placing the ship some 100 miles west of the Azores. There were no signs of a struggle. Valuables, including Captain Briggs's chronometer, sextant, though the ship's navigation papers were missing, and the crew's personal belongings were all untouched. In the captain's cabin, Sarah Briggs's sewing machine sat undisturbed, her thimble still by its side. Sophia's small doll lay nestled on her bed, as if she had just stepped away to play. A half-eaten meal was still laid out in the galley, though the fire was cold. It was as if everyone had simply vanished mid-activity. Yet, there were a few unsettling details. The ship's single lifeboat, a yawl, was missing. The binnacle, which housed the ship's compass, was displaced, suggesting it had been hastily moved. The ship's only pump, essential for keeping the hull clear of water, was disassembled on deck. And perhaps most strangely, out of the 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol in the cargo hold, 9 were found to be completely empty. Imagine, if you can, the thoughts racing through Mate DeVoe's mind as he stood on that silent, abandoned deck. A ship, perfectly sound, with ample provisions, yet utterly devoid of its human occupants. Where had they gone? And why? The Dei Grazia crew, with a remarkable feat of seamanship, decided to bring the Mary Celeste into Gibraltar. It was a perilous journey, with only a few men to manage 2 ships. But they succeeded, and the mysterious brigantine was eventually towed into port. There, a salvage court convened to investigate the extraordinary discovery. The court was deeply skeptical, almost convinced that foul play had been involved, perhaps even an elaborate insurance fraud scheme or a conspiracy between the 2 captains. But repeated inquiries and inspections found no evidence to support such claims. The cargo was largely intact, the ship was sound, and Captain Briggs was known as a man of impeccable character. And so, the haunting questions began to swirl, and they have never truly ceased to echo in the quiet corners of our minds. Was it piracy? This was an initial thought, of course. But why would pirates leave behind the valuables, the untouched cargo, and not a single sign of struggle? It simply didn't fit. Pirates, as history tells us, were rarely so tidy or so uninterested in plunder. What about mutiny? Could the crew have turned on the captain? Again, there was no evidence of a fight, no blood, no disarray. Captain Briggs was respected, and his crew, by all accounts, was loyal. And why would mutineers abandon a perfectly good ship with untouched cargo? They would surely take it or destroy it. Could it have been an encounter with a sea monster? In the whispers of legend, the vastness of the ocean often spawns tales of creatures beyond our imagining. But while such stories stir the imagination, they rarely provide a practical explanation for the cold, hard facts found on the deck of the Mary Celeste. The ship was intact, not crushed or torn asunder. Perhaps an exploding cargo? This theory gained some traction. The cargo was alcohol. Perhaps the fumes from the 9 empty barrels had built up, creating the terrifying illusion of an imminent explosion. Imagine the panic. A sudden, deafening roar, perhaps just a pressure release, or a smaller, contained blast that shook the ship. The crew, fearing for their lives, would have rapidly launched the yawl, believing the ship was about to blow. This could explain the hastily moved binnacle, the disassembled pump, perhaps trying to vent the fumes or clear water if they thought the hull was breached, and the missing lifeboat. They would have intended to return once the danger passed, but then, perhaps, a sudden squall, a rogue wave, or simply the currents, swept the lifeboat and its occupants away, leaving the Mary Celeste to sail on, a lonely testament to their terror. But if so, why no scorching, no charring on the deck? And why would they leave so much behind? What about a waterspout or a sudden squall? The sea is unpredictable. A sudden, violent waterspout could have engulfed the ship, sweeping away those on deck, or perhaps disorienting everyone so severely that they were forced into the lifeboat. Or a sudden squall, so fierce and unexpected, might have caused them to abandon ship in the belief it was foundering, only for the Mary Celeste to recover once the worst of the weather passed. But again, the ship itself showed no signs of such extreme weather damage. And the displaced compass? Some speculated that the ship might have been disoriented by an errant compass, leading them off course and into unexpected trouble. But how would this lead to their vanishing? The truth, my dear friend, remains veiled by the vast, deep blue. The families of the lost, the Briggs and the crew, were left with nothing but agonizing uncertainty. No bodies were ever found, no trace of the lifeboat, no definitive answer to the piercing question. What happened to the people of the Mary Celeste? She continued to sail, this ship, for many years after her infamous discovery, passing through many hands, always carrying with her that silent, haunting story. But it seems the sea, having claimed its secret, was not yet finished with her. In 1885, some 13 years after her abandonment, the Mary Celeste was deliberately wrecked off the coast of Haiti in an insurance fraud scheme. Her long, mysterious journey finally came to an end, though her most profound mystery lived on, untouched by her final, ignominious fate. And so, as the night deepens and the world outside grows still, this quiet riddle persists. The Mary Celeste remains a whisper on the wind, a story told and retold, each retelling adding another layer to its enigma. Perhaps it is not the answer that holds the true fascination, but the question itself, the gentle, persistent tug of the unknown. It reminds us that even in our meticulously mapped world, there are corners where the veil between what we know and what we can only imagine remains thin. The ocean, timeless and vast, holds its secrets close, sometimes offering us only the faintest echo of a story, inviting us to listen and to wonder. And that, my dear one, is a mystery as beautiful as it is profound. Story 3. It was Christmas Eve, 1945, in a quiet, bustling town called Fayetteville, nestled deep in the green hills of West Virginia. The world was just beginning to breathe again after the long shadows of war had receded, and a spirit of joyful anticipation filled the crisp winter air. For the Sauter family, Christmas was a particularly special time, a vibrant celebration woven into the fabric of their lives. George and Jenny Sauter were the heart of a large, lively family. They had 10 children, a bustling household filled with laughter, the joyful chaos of youth, and the comforting rhythms of a family deeply connected. George, an Italian immigrant who had made a good life for himself in America, ran a successful trucking business. Jenny was the anchor, a devoted mother, always busy but always present, her home filled with the scent of good cooking and the warmth of a loving embrace. On that particular Christmas Eve, the older children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, and Jenny, who was named after her mother, were out, perhaps enjoying the festive atmosphere in town. But at home, a quieter evening was unfolding for the younger ones. Betty, Jenny, Louis, Martha, and Maurice, all nestled in their beds, probably dreaming of Santa Claus and the wonders the morning would bring. Sylvester, the youngest at 2, was tucked in with his parents. The remaining 4 children, Marion, John, George Jr., and Jenny the daughter, were still awake, playing games or simply enjoying the last moments of the day. Around midnight, a strange thing happened. The telephone rang. It was an unusual hour for a call, especially on Christmas Eve. Jenny answered. On the other end, a voice she didn't recognize asked for someone she didn't know. A moment of quiet confusion, a brief apology, and the call disconnected. As she returned to bed, she noticed that the lights in the living room, which had been on when she answered the phone, were still on. One of the children must have been awake. She went to turn them off, and then she noticed it. The front door was unlocked, and the curtains were wide open, something they never did. She gently closed the door, drew the curtains, and returned to the quiet warmth of her bed, drifting back to sleep. But peace was fleeting that night. Not long after, a loud thud on the roof jolted her awake again. She heard what sounded like rolling. Moments later, the smell of smoke began to curl through the air, insidious and undeniable. She roused George. He got up to investigate, and what he found was terrifying. The Sauter home was on fire. The blaze had started in the area where George kept his office, near the phone lines. Flames licked greedily at the wooden structure, consuming it with a frightening speed. George, always a man of action, reacted quickly. He yelled for the older children to wake up, to get out of the house. Marion, the eldest present, along with John and George Jr., managed to escape. They rushed out into the cold night, disoriented but safe. But 5 children were still inside: Betty, Jenny, Louis, Martha, and Maurice. Panic, cold and sharp, seized George and Jenny. George tried desperately to re-enter the burning house, but the smoke and flames pushed him back. He shouted for the children, his voice raw with fear, but there was no answer. He thought of the ladder, usually kept outside, that he used for chores. If only he could reach the children's second-story windows. But the ladder was inexplicably missing from its usual spot. In desperation, he tried to move one of his large coal trucks, hoping to position it so he could climb onto the roof or reach a window. But the truck, usually so reliable, wouldn't start. It cranked and coughed, but the engine stubbornly refused to turn over. The other truck, also usually dependable, wouldn't start either. It was as if everything that could go wrong did. As the inferno raged, help slowly began to arrive from neighbors, drawn by the orange glow against the dark sky. They watched, helpless, as the Sodder family home, the heart of their lives, burned to the ground. Firefighters, who were not far away, were strangely delayed. When George finally called the fire department, there was no answer. A neighbor had to drive into town to alert them. By the time they arrived, it was dawn, and the house was nothing but a smoldering pile of ash and debris. When the embers cooled, and the grim task of sifting through the ruins began, a chilling discovery was made. Or rather, a lack of discovery. There were no human remains. Not a single bone. Not a trace of the 5 children. The fire marshal, a local man, declared that the fire had been hot enough to cremate the bodies, leaving nothing behind. But Jenny, a mother who knew her children's bones and teeth, refused to believe it. She had heard of house fires, of remains being found, even if small. Her maternal instinct screamed that her children were not there. The lack of any evidence of the children within the ashes became the haunting core of the mystery. An autopsy of one of the adults' bones from the Sodder family's home in Fayetteville, West Virginia, was performed. It found that the vertebra was found intact, meaning that it had not been exposed to the extreme heat that would have cremated the children, as the fire marshal had claimed. This evidence supported the parents' belief that the children were not in the house during the fire. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The official explanation remained death by fire. But for George and Jenny, it was an unbearable, illogical conclusion. They began their own quiet, relentless search, driven by an unshakable belief that their children had somehow survived. They put up billboards along Route 16, offering rewards for information. They mailed out thousands of flyers. They hired private investigators. They followed every lead, every whisper, no matter how faint. A witness claimed to have seen a man throwing balls of fire at the Sodder house just before the blaze. Another reported seeing a car with unknown occupants fleeing the scene. The telephone line, strangely cut before the fire, raised questions. Why was the ladder moved? Why wouldn't the truck start? These small, unsettling details began to weave a tapestry of suspicion, suggesting that the fire might not have been accidental. One theory that quietly circulated was that the fire was connected to George Sodder's outspoken criticism of Mussolini and the Italian government, a stance that had earned him some enemies in the community. Perhaps it was a warning that went terribly wrong, or a deliberate act of intimidation. There were whispers of the mafia, of grudges, of secrets buried deep. But nothing was ever proven. Years passed, then decades. George and Jenny never gave up hope. Their remaining children grew up, started their own families, but the shadow of their missing siblings remained. Every stranger in a crowd, every news report, every unusual occurrence held a flicker of possibility. Then in 1967, 2 decades after the fire, a photograph arrived in the mail. It was sent to Jenny, and on the back, scrawled in an unknown hand, were the words, Louis Sodder. I love brother Frankie. Illo boys. A 90132 or 35. The photo showed a young man, perhaps in his late 20s or early 30s, with features strikingly similar to what Louis might have looked like as an adult. His eyes, his nose, the set of his jaw. Jenny felt a mother's recognition, a surge of electric hope. The postmark was from Central City, Kentucky. George immediately dispatched a private investigator to Kentucky to explore this new, tantalizing lead. The investigator reported back that he was unable to find Louis, and warned the family against continuing to search, telling them that the search for the children was too dangerous, and that if they continued to search, they should stop immediately. This only deepened the mystery and heightened the family's suspicions that someone was trying to prevent them from finding the truth. The investigator, after some time, simply vanished, leaving the Sodders with more questions than answers. Was the photo real? Was Louis alive somewhere, perhaps unaware of the torment his family had endured? Did Frankie refer to the family's surname? And why the cryptic message and the warning? The Sodder family continued their lonely vigil. The billboard, faded and weathered, remained a fixture along the highway, a testament to their enduring hope. George passed away in 1968, his heart heavy with the unsolved mystery. Jenny, however, lived on until 1989, never once giving up on her children. She always kept the photograph of the young man she believed was Louis on her mantelpiece, a quiet prayer in her heart that one day, the truth would emerge. To this day, the disappearance of the 5 Sodder children remains an unsolved puzzle. The questions linger, hanging in the quiet West Virginia air like the scent of wood smoke on a winter night. Did they perish in the fire, their bodies utterly consumed, defying all known forensic science? Or did they escape, perhaps even help to escape, and grow up elsewhere, their memories of Fayetteville lost or suppressed? It's a story that reminds us that sometimes, life doesn't tie up neatly with a bow. Sometimes, the answers remain just out of reach, hidden in the mists of time. But even in the face of the unknown, there is often a quiet perseverance, a mother's unending hope, and a human curiosity that refuses to let a mystery truly fade. And so we wonder gently about the Sodder children and the silent, snowy night they simply vanished. Story 4. It was a long, long time ago, in a place that felt as if it had been gently tucked away from the rest of the world. Imagine, if you will, a village nestled deep within a valley, where the ancient pine trees stood so tall they seemed to whisper secrets to the clouds. Their scent, earthy and clean, was the very breath of that place. We called it Oakhaven, though there were few oak trees left, mostly just those venerable pines and the silver birches that shivered in the breeze. I was but a small thing then, all knees and elbows, with a mind brimming with questions, as most children's minds are. My days were a kaleidoscope of sun-dappled paths, the gurgle of the stream that bisected our village, and the comforting clatter from my grandmother's kitchen. Nana, bless her heart, had a way of seeing the world that always made sense, even when things truly didn't. The particular summer I'm thinking of, the air hung heavy with the promise of berries ripening and the scent of wild honeysuckle. Everything felt peaceful, predictable, until, that is, Mr. Silas Blackwood simply vanished. Now, Mr. Blackwood wasn't a man who went unnoticed, not precisely. He lived in the oldest house in Oakhaven, a grand, slightly melancholic Victorian with a sagging porch and a garden that had long since surrendered to the wilderness. He was a quiet man, a recluse of sorts, but not an unkind one. He spent his days in his vast library, or so we imagined, surrounded by books whose spines were cracked with age and stories. He would emerge only for his weekly trip to the general store, a tall, slender shadow with a neatly trimmed beard, his eyes, when you caught them, holding a distant, almost wistful light. He had a routine, you see, and in a small village like Oakhaven, routines are the very threads that weave the fabric of daily life. Every Tuesday, precisely at 10 minutes past 9, he would appear at Mrs. Henderson's general store. He'd buy his tea, a specific type of biscuits, and the local newspaper. Mrs. Henderson, a woman whose smile could melt ice, would exchange a few pleasantries, and then Mr. Blackwood would retreat into his quiet world until the next Tuesday. The Tuesday he vanished, he simply didn't arrive. Mrs. Henderson, being Mrs. Henderson, initially thought nothing of it. Perhaps he was unwell, she mused. Perhaps he'd decided to skip biscuits this week. But by Wednesday, a subtle ripple of unease began to spread. Oakhaven was not a place where people simply didn't show up. If you were sick, someone would know. If you were away, you'd leave word. By Thursday morning, the ripple had become a quiet tremor. My grandfather, who served as the village's unofficial caretaker and wise man, decided it was time to call. He walked up the winding path to Mr. Blackwood's house, his steps measured and deliberate, his hands tucked behind his back. We children, peeking from behind curtains, watched him knock. And knock again. And again. No answer. The front door, usually firmly shut, was ajar. Just a fraction, but enough to hint at something amiss. Grandfather pushed it open slowly. The house was cool, shadowed, and utterly silent. There was no sign of Mr. Blackwood. The fire in the hearth was cold, the teacup on the table empty, a book lying face down as if he'd just stepped away for a moment. But a moment had stretched into days. The village rallied, as villages do when one of their own is in need. People searched the surrounding woods, their voices hushed and calls echoing through the whispering pines. They checked the old mill, the riverbanks, even the forgotten paths that led up into the higher reaches of the valley. But Mr. Blackwood was nowhere. Not a trace. Not a footprint, not a discarded button, nothing. It was as if the earth had simply swallowed him whole. The police came, of course. 2 stern-faced men in dark uniforms. Their city weighs a stark contrast to our quiet village. They asked questions, filled out forms, and walked through Mr. Blackwood's house with an air of professional detachment. They found no signs of struggle, no forced entry, no note. Nothing to suggest foul play, nothing to suggest a planned departure. Just an absence. A hollow space where a man used to be. I remember the adults speaking in low tones, their sentences unfinished, their eyes often drifting towards the ominous silhouette of Mr. Blackwood's house against the twilight sky. The children, as children often do, made up stories. He'd been taken by the forest sprites, some whispered. He'd turned into a raven and flown away, others imagined. I, with my curious mind, simply wondered where he went. Days bled into weeks, and weeks into months. The leaves on the birches turned gold, then crimson, then fell, leaving the trees stark against the autumn sky. Winter came, blanketing Oakhaven in a pristine white silence, the kind that makes every sound distinct, every whisper amplified. Still, no Mr. Blackwood. The police eventually closed the case, filing it away as a missing person, likely presumed to have wandered off or met with some unknown accident in the vast wilderness. But we in Oakhaven knew the wilderness. We respected it, and it did not simply consume people without leaving a trace. My Nana, with her quiet wisdom, would often say, "Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved by logic, child. Some require a different kind of seeing." And indeed, it felt like a puzzle with missing pieces, a story unfinished. One day, long after the immediate shock had faded, and Mr. Blackwood's house had begun its slow surrender to the encroaching ivy, I found myself drawn to it. My childhood curiosity, perhaps foolishly, pulled me towards the forbidden. The garden had become a tangled mass of thorns and wild roses, a beautiful, wild chaos. I pushed through a gap in the overgrown hedge, my heart thrumming a little faster than usual. The air inside the garden was different, thicker, laced with the scent of damp earth and forgotten blooms. I wandered aimlessly, tracing the phantom lines of what must have once been neatly tended flower beds. And then I saw it. Tucked beneath a sprawling lilac bush, almost completely hidden by its heavy, fragrant branches, was a small, intricately carved wooden box. It wasn't large, perhaps the size of my two small hands put together. The wood was dark, almost black, and polished smooth. There was no lock, no latch, just a simple, almost invisible seam. My fingers trembled as I gently lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, perfectly preserved pressed flower, a white lily, delicate and ethereal. And beneath it, a tiny, folded piece of paper. I carefully unfolded it, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't a letter. It was a single line of script, elegant and flowing, written in ink that had faded to a sepia tone with age. It simply read, "The heart knows secrets the mind cannot comprehend." That was all. No signature, no date, no further explanation. Just that single, enigmatic sentence. I clutched the box and the note, my mind racing. Who had put it there? Mr. Blackwood himself? And what did it mean? I took it straight to Nana, my eyes wide with the thrill of discovery. She took the box, her brow furrowed in thought as she read the note. A slow, knowing smile touched her lips. "Ah, Silas," she murmured, almost to herself. He always did have a way with words. She didn't offer an explanation, not really. She just held the note and the lily, turning them over in her aged hands, a faraway look in her eyes. "Some things, my dear," she said softly, "are whispers between souls, not meant for loud pronouncements." That cryptic message only deepened the mystery, of course. It didn't explain where Mr. Blackwood went, or why. But it added a layer of quiet wonder, a hint that perhaps his disappearance wasn't a tragedy, but something else entirely. Perhaps it was a deliberate act, a journey into the unknown, prompted by some profound personal revelation. Years passed. I grew up, left Oakhaven for a time, then returned, drawn back by the quiet hum of the pines and the comfort of familiar faces. Mr. Blackwood's house, long since abandoned, became a part of the landscape, a landmark of a mystery that had never truly left us. The villagers would still talk about him sometimes, usually on quiet evenings, their voices low and thoughtful, each offering a new theory, a different interpretation of the silence he left behind. Some believed he had discovered something profound in one of his ancient books, a secret passage perhaps, or a forgotten truth that called him to another life. Others whispered of a lost love, finally returned to him after decades, sweeping him away to a place beyond our valley. And some, the most pragmatic amongst us, still held on to the idea that he simply got lost, though deep down, they knew it didn't quite fit. The little wooden box and the lily, along with the enigmatic note, remained with Nana until her passing. She left it to me, a small, treasured inheritance. I keep it on my bedside table now, a quiet reminder of Oakhaven's enduring enigma. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind rustles through the pine trees outside my window, I imagine I can hear Mr. Blackwood's whispers carried on the breeze. Not words, not a voice, but a sense of something unresolved, something beautiful and elusive. The heart knows secrets the mind cannot comprehend. I think of that line often. It suggests a journey not of the body, but of the spirit, a disappearance not into oblivion, but into a realm beyond our ordinary understanding. And perhaps, that is the most comforting explanation of all. For in Oakhaven, under the watchful gaze of the whispering pines, the mystery of Silas Blackwood isn't a dark shadow, but a soft, lingering question, a story that continues to unfold in the quiet corners of our collective imagination, a true tale that hasn't quite found its ending. And perhaps that's exactly how it was meant to be. Story 5. Some stories, you see, aren't like tidy packages tied with a bow. They're more like a single, exquisitely crafted feather, found unexpectedly, hinting at a bird that passed by, leaving behind just enough beauty to make you wonder where it came from, and where it went. This is one such feather. Our story begins in a place called Somerton Beach, a serene stretch of sand in South Australia. Imagine, if you will, the kind of evening where the air is still warm from the day's sun, and the gentle hush of the ocean is the only sound. The date was December 1st, 1948. Early risers, out for their morning stroll along the shore, discovered something quite unusual near the Somerton Park Surf Life Saving Club. There, leaning against the seawall, a man was resting. He was well dressed, in a neat suit, his head tilted back as if in peaceful slumber. But as the sun climbed higher and other people passed by, a quiet unease began to settle. He hadn't stirred. When the authorities arrived, they confirmed what had become subtly apparent. The man was gone. He had passed away there, seemingly without a struggle, amidst the tranquil whispers of the sea. Now this is where our quiet puzzle truly begins. There was nothing outwardly remarkable about him. He was a man of good health, it seemed, with strong features and a fit physique. Yet, there was no sign of violence, no obvious injury. His pockets, however, held a peculiar assortment of items. A ticket for a train journey from Adelaide to Henley Beach, a bus ticket, a pack of Army Club cigarettes, a half-smoked one tucked behind his ear, and a box of Bryant and May matches. No wallet, no cash, no identification. Not a single slip of paper bearing a name or address. It was as if he had simply materialized there, a phantom in a tailored suit. The initial investigation was, as you can imagine, a search for a name. Fingerprints were taken, descriptions circulated, missing persons reports scoured. Yet, days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and not a single soul came forward to identify this quietly departed gentleman. He remained nameless, a mystery folded into the fabric of the beach itself. The post-mortem examination, a necessary step in such a perplexing case, only deepened the enigma. The doctors found no obvious cause of death. No poison detected, no internal injuries. His organs, though congested, offered no clear answer. It was as if his body had simply decided to cease, without external prompting. This was, to put it mildly, highly unusual. How could a perfectly healthy man simply end on a public beach without any sign of distress? It was like trying to catch mist in your hands. Then a small, curious thread appeared. About 10 days after the discovery of the man, police located a brown suitcase that had been checked into the cloakroom at the Adelaide railway station on November 30th, the day before the man was found. Could this be his? The timing felt like a soft chime of possibility. Inside, the contents were mundane. A dressing gown, a red slipper, pajamas, shaving items for pairs of underpants, vests, ties, and other everyday necessities. Nothing remarkable, you might think. But the curious thing was, once again, the absence of identifying marks. All the labels had been removed from the clothes. All, that is, except for 3 items, a tie, a dressing gown, and a pair of trousers. Each had the almost imperceptible mark T. Keene, or G. Keene sewn into them. Was this a clue, a whispered name? Police searched for anyone by that name, but the trail, like so many others, grew cold. No one named Keene had been reported missing. The suitcase, with its ordinary yet strangely anonymous contents, became another layer of this quiet riddle. But the most intriguing piece of the puzzle, the true heart of this gentle mystery, was yet to be discovered. It came almost 2 months after the man's passing, in a very unexpected place. Remember those neatly tailored trousers the Somerton man was wearing? Well, a careful examination revealed a small, hidden pocket sewn into the waistband, and within that tiny secret space was a small, tightly rolled piece of paper. On it, printed in faded ink, were 2 words, Tamam Shud. These words, when translated from Persian, mean finished or ended. The fragment was clearly torn from a book, but which book? And why was it hidden away like a secret? The police, fascinated by this cryptic clue, issued a public appeal, hoping someone might recognize the phrase or the tear mark from their own books. And quite remarkably, someone did. A local doctor, out driving, saw the newspaper article and remembered something. a copy of Edward Fitzgerald's translation of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of ancient Persian poetry, had been left on the back seat of his unlocked car around the time the man was found. The book, a relatively rare first edition, was missing its final page, the very page where the words Tamamshud would appear. It was a perfect match. The tear in the book precisely aligned with the fragment found in the Somerton man's pocket. Now, imagine the excitement. A book, a source, a tangible link. But this was just another turn in our labyrinth. Inside the recovered Rubaiyat, police found 5 lines of faint, handwritten capital letters. It looked like a code, perhaps a message. Here's what was written, in a slightly unsettling, almost childlike scrawl. Rgobab Mlyabob? Tabsky Qtab. Many brilliant minds tried to decipher this sequence. Codebreakers, linguists, cryptographers, all applied their skills, but the letters stubbornly refused to yield a clear meaning. Was it a code at all, or perhaps something more personal, a mnemonic, a series of random jottings? The question remains, a quiet hum in the background of this story. But the book held another secret. On the back cover, also handwritten, was a telephone number. This number belonged to a woman named Jessica Thompson. She was a young, captivating ballet dancer living nearby, in a suburb called Glenelg, not far from Somerton Beach. A sudden rush of hope, a glimmer of light in the deepening mystery. Perhaps she knew him. Perhaps she held the key. When detectives visited Jessica, her reaction was curious. When shown the bust of the Somerton man, she looked away, seemingly shaken, refusing to directly identify him. Yet, she freely admitted to owning a rare copy of Fitzgerald's Rubaiyat, a copy she claimed to have given away years earlier to a man named Alfred Boxall. He had been a soldier during World War II, and she had given it to him as a farewell gift. She denied any knowledge of the Somerton man. The plot, like a gently unfurling petal, thickened. The police tracked down Alfred Boxall, and to everyone's astonishment, Mr. Boxall was very much alive and well, living in Sydney. He still had his copy of the Rubaiyat, the very one Jessica had given him, complete with the Tamamshud page intact. So, the book found in the doctor's car wasn't Boxall's. Another dead end, another twist in the tale. However, Jessica Thompson's story held another faint whisper. She told police that while serving in the army, she had received another copy of the Rubaiyat from a soldier named Prosper. She mentioned that this soldier had a copy of the Rubaiyat that she had given him and that he copied a poem from it. She later claimed that the soldier who received the book from her was not Alfred character, was never definitively identified. Boxall. This Prosper character was never definitively identified. Decades later, theories emerged about Jessica Thompson's potential deeper involvement. It was revealed that her son, Robin, born in 1947, had physical characteristics strikingly similar to those of the Somerton man, particularly a rare dental condition and a unique ear shape. Could the Somerton man have been Robin's father? Was Jessica protecting a secret, a past love, a clandestine affair? She passed away in 2007, taking her secrets with her. Her daughter, Kate, later claimed her mother did know the man and described her as being evasive when asked about the case. And so, the quiet mystery of the Somerton man endures. Who was he truly? A spy, perhaps, caught in a shadowy game of international intrigue? A jilted lover, his heart broken, choosing a final, anonymous farewell? A victim of an elaborate, untraceable poison? Or was it something else entirely? A tragic accident dressed in the costume of the inexplicable? We may never know. The clues, like scattered seashells on the beach, are tantalizing, beautiful, yet they don't quite fit together to form a complete picture. The Tamamshud man remains an enigma, a man without a name, a life without a clear end. Perhaps, though, that's the beauty of it. Some stories are not meant to be solved, but simply to be wondered at. They invite us to ponder the depths of human experience, the strange coincidences of life, and the enduring power of the unknown. They remind us that even in a world striving for answers, some quiet whispers are content to remain just that, whispers carried on the breeze, forever intriguing, forever unsolved. And in that quiet wonder, perhaps, there is a gentle comfort to be found. Story 6. Of all the stories I might share with you tonight, wrapped in the quiet hush of the evening, there's one that often comes to mind, not because it's filled with grand drama or terrifying twists, but precisely because it isn't. It's a gentle mystery, a story whispered by the winds through the ancient trees, and one that has settled into the very stones of our small coastal village like a soft, persistent moss. Imagine, if you will, a place where the air always carries the scent of salt and pine, where the rhythm of the tides dictates the pace of life, and where the closest neighbor might be a mile or two down a winding, unpaved road. This was Havenwood, and it still is, though the faces change with the turning of the years. Our story, however, belongs to a time when life here felt a little more slow motion, a little more untethered from the world beyond the whispering dunes. In Havenwood, there lived a woman named Alara. Her name itself seemed to chime softly, like the tiny bells she sometimes braided into her long, silver-streaked hair. Alara wasn't born here, no, she arrived one spring, almost 30 years ago now, in a little blue car packed with nothing but books, a worn easel, and a profound quietness that seemed to ripple out from her like heat from a stone. She bought the old lighthouse keeper's cottage, the one nestled closest to the ancient whispering woods that stretched inland, away from the fierce ocean cliffs. It was a peculiar choice, as most preferred the bracing sea air, but Alara found solace in the deep, green quiet of the forest. Alara was, by all accounts, a creature of habit, yet her habits were not those of strict routine, but rather of a gentle, almost ritualistic engagement with the world around her. Each morning, after the first blush of dawn painted the sky in soft mauves and oranges, she would prepare a cup of strong tea, often with a slice of the lemon cake she baked herself, and sit on her tiny porch. From there, she would watch the first gulls swoop and call, and listen to the forest awakening. Her true devotion, however, was to her walks. Not brisk, purposeful strides, but meandering journeys into the woods. She knew every path, every hidden glade, every ancient, gnarled tree that seemed to hold stories in its bark. She'd take a small canvas, a sketchbook, or sometimes just a magnifying glass, and she would disappear among the towering pines and moss-covered rocks for hours. She wasn't seeking anything grand. She'd once told my grandmother, just the small, overlooked miracles. The intricate pattern of a fern, the vibrant hue of a mushroom, the way light filtered through the canopy, painting fleeting patterns on the forest floor. When she returned, often with pine needles in her hair and a smear of charcoal on her cheek, her eyes would hold a quiet wonder, as if she'd seen something truly profound. Her cottage, too, was an extension of her gentle soul. It was filled with natural curiosities, polished stones, dried wildflowers, intricate bird nests, and shelves overflowing with books on botany, astronomy, and ancient myths. There was always a faint scent of beeswax and lavender in the air, and a soft light seemed to glow from within its windows, even on the cloudiest days. She was not a recluse, not entirely. She would visit the village market on Thursdays, offering a shy smile and exchanging a few quiet words with Mrs. Henderson, who ran the bakery, or with old Mr. Finch, who sold freshly caught fish. She was a known, if enigmatic, part of Havenwood's gentle tapestry. It was a Tuesday, a day much like any other late spring day, when the softness of the season was truly beginning to unfurl itself. The air was warm, sweet with the scent of blossoming honeysuckle, and a gentle breeze sighed through the trees. Alara had, as was her custom, finished her morning tea and, with her small, worn leather sketchbook tucked under her arm, set off into the woods. She wore her favorite faded blue smock and sturdy walking boots. My father, then just a boy of 10, saw her from his bedroom window, waving faintly as she disappeared down the path that led to the ancient oak grove. It was a common sight, and no one thought anything of it. The sun climbed higher, casting long, dappled shadows across the forest floor. The afternoon stretched on, warm and languid. By evening, as the light began to fade to a soft gray-purple, a subtle shift occurred. Alara hadn't returned. At first, it was a quiet observation, a gentle note of mild surprise. Perhaps she'd found a particularly captivating patch of wildflowers, or a secluded stream, and lost track of time. It wasn't entirely unheard of for her to stay out longer than usual. My grandmother, who lived a little further down the road and shared a casual, fond acquaintance with Alara, noticed the unlit lamp in her cottage window as true darkness settled. Alara was meticulous about lighting her lamp before dusk, a beacon in the twilight. A small, almost imperceptible prickle of unease began to stir. By dawn the next morning, the lamp remained unlit. That's when the gentle concern began to deepen. Mrs. Henderson, noticing Alara hadn't appeared for her usual morning newspaper pickup at the general store, mentioned it to her husband. Old Mr. Finch, too, remembered not seeing her little blue car for 2 days. One by one, the small threads of daily life that Alara wove into the community began to unravel, revealing her absence. The search, when it began, was not frantic but methodical, almost sorrowful from the start. The villagers, knowing Alara's quiet nature, respected her wish for solitude, but this felt different. It was the absence, the missing piece in the familiar puzzle of Havenwood. Men and women, many of whom had seen Alara on her walks, or shared a quiet word with her at the market, fanned out into the vast, green expanse of the forest. They called her name, softly at first, then a little louder, their voices swallowed by the dense foliage. They searched the paths she frequented, the old logging trails, the edges of the whispering bog, and the rocky outcrops that overlooked the sea. They looked for a dropped sketchbook, a misplaced boot, any small sign that might offer a clue. Days turned into a week, and then two. The search dogs, brought in from the nearest town, would follow a scent for a short while, then stop abruptly, circling in confusion, as if the scent simply evaporated into the air. They searched the paths she frequented, the old logging trails, the edges of the whispering bog, and the rocky outcrops that overlooked the sea. They looked for a dropped sketchbook, a misplaced boot, any small sign that might offer a clue. Days turned into a week, and then two. The search dogs, brought in from the nearest town, would follow a scent for a short while, then stop abruptly, circling in confusion, as if the scent simply evaporated into the air. They searched the paths she frequented, the old logging trails, the edges of the whispering bog, and the rocky outcrops that overlooked the sea. They looked for a dropped sketchbook, a misplaced boot, any small sign that might offer a clue. Days turned into a week, and then two. The search dogs, brought in from the nearest town, would follow a scent for a short while, then stop abruptly, circling in confusion, as if the scent simply evaporated into the air. They searched the paths she frequented, the old logging trails, the edges of the whispering bog, and the rocky outcrops that overlooked the sea. They looked for a dropped sketchbook, a misplaced boot, any small sign that might offer a clue. Days turned into a week, and then two. The search dogs, brought in from the nearest town, would follow a scent for a short while, then stop abruptly, circling in confusion, as if the scent simply evaporated into the air. It was during this time that a peculiar story began to circulate, a quiet murmur among the search parties. Not a clue, not evidence, but an observation. Several people, including my own father, swore that on that very Tuesday afternoon, just as the sun began its slow descent, they had seen a peculiar light in the forest. Not a flashlight or a lantern, but a soft, glowing luminescence, high among the ancient trees, almost like a faint, shimmering curtain. It lasted only a moment, they said, before winking out. At the time, they dismissed it as a trick of the light, or perhaps the sun catching on a patch of mist. But as the days of searching stretched into weeks, the memory of that light returned, casting a strange, ethereal pall over Alara's disappearance. No trace of Alara was ever found. No discarded belongings, no signs of struggle, no footprints that didn't simply end abruptly in the soft forest loam. It was as if she had simply, quietly, stepped out of the world and into another. The police, after exhaustive efforts, eventually closed the case, listing it as a missing person, presumed lost at sea or in the wilderness. But Havenwood knew better. Alara was too careful, too connected to the land, to simply vanish without a whisper of a sign. As time drifted on, like the clouds across the endless sky, the initial worry softened into a persistent, gentle wonder. The theories that emerged were as varied as the wildflowers Alara so adored, yet none held a hint of malice or dark intent. Some believed she had finally found her ultimate muse, a secret glade of unparalleled beauty, and simply decided to stay, becoming one with the forest she loved so deeply. Perhaps, they reasoned, she was an old soul, too delicate for the hurried pace of the world, and the wilderness had simply embraced her. Others, the more whimsical among us, whispered about the fabled Whispering Hollow, a place deep within the oldest part of the woods, where the veil between worlds was said to be thin. They spoke of ancient energies, of pathways unseen by mortal eyes, and wondered if Alara, with her deep sensitivity to nature, had somehow stumbled upon one, and finding it more beautiful than anything she had ever known, simply stepped through. The shimmering light, then, became a gateway, a gentle farewell. There were also those who believed she had simply chosen to leave, to begin a new chapter of her quiet life somewhere else, far from the familiar rhythms of Havenwood. Perhaps she had always harbored a secret wanderlust, a desire to explore beyond the known maps. But if so, why leave her beloved cottage, her books, her half-finished canvases? And why leave without a note, a word, anything to ease the quiet concern of those who had grown to admire her gentle spirit? This theory, while plausible, felt less true to the Alara they knew. She was not one for sudden departures, but for thoughtful, deliberate movement. The cottage remained, for a time, exactly as she had left it. The small teacup sat on the porch table, a dried lemon peel still clinging to its rim. Her easel stood in the sunlit studio, a half-painted landscape of the forest, rendered in soft greens and muted browns, still on its stand. It was almost as if she would return at any moment, dust off her smock, and pick up her brush again. Eventually, years later, the cottage was sold, but even now, when the winds blow just so, and the light falls in a particular way through the ancient trees, you can almost feel Alara's presence, a gentle echo in the quiet air. I often think of her, especially on those warm, late spring afternoons, when the scent of pine is strong and the forest seems to hum with secrets. Her story isn't one of fear or sorrow, but of enduring mystery, a riddle posed by the very land itself. It reminds us that not all stories have a neat beginning, middle, and end, tied up with a bright red bough. Some stories, the most intriguing ones, perhaps, simply fade into the landscape, becoming part of the collective memory, a soft, unanswered question that lingers like the last notes of a forgotten melody. And that, my dear listener, is the quiet truth of it. Alara's disappearance became a part of Havenwood, a gentle reminder that the world holds wonders and mysteries beyond our comprehension, and that sometimes the most profound answers are found not in what is revealed, but in what remains beautifully, eternally unknown. So rest easy now, and let the quiet mystery of Alara's story drift through your dreams, like the soft whispers of the wind through the ancient trees. And good night. May your dreams be as peaceful as the gentle woods of Havenwood.